My name is Charlotte, and this is my love story. It's not the kind you read in fairy tales or watch in movies, filled with sweeping gestures and grand declarations. No, my story is quieter, subtler, complicated in ways I never expected. It began innocently, like many things do, but it unraveled into something that would change me forever. It all started with a dinner invitation. Jacob had been a staple in our lives for as long as I could remember. A family friend so entrenched in our day-to-day existence that he was practically part of the furniture. He and my mom went way back. College friends who had somehow never drifted apart despite the years. He was a familiar presence, yet tonight he felt different. Or maybe I did. The truth was, I'd started to notice Jacob in ways I hadn't before. It had been subtle at first, just a passing acknowledgement of his charm or how well he carried himself. But over time, my observations had turned into something I couldn't ignore. His confident smile lingered in my mind long after he left the room, and I found myself replaying snippets of conversations, dissecting the timbre of his voice or the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. It felt wrong. Unfamiliar and strange, yet electrifying. He was 35 for one thing and my mother's friend, a man I'd grown up calling Uncle Jacob for years until it felt ridiculous to keep the title as I got older. But that didn't change the fact that recently my heart had started to flutter whenever he was around, like some overdramatic scene from a romance novel. That night, he arrived at our house like he always did, breezing through the door with his signature mix of charm and warmth. He brought a bottle of wine, as usual, handing it to my mom with a wink and a grin that made her laugh in that carefree way she always did around him. "Jacob, you're spoiling me," she teased, already pulling out a corkscrew. "Of course I am," he replied smoothly. "Someone has to." I stayed in the kitchen, half listening as they launched into their usual banter. I pretended to be busy, setting the table and adjusting things that didn't need adjusting, all while stealing glances at him. Jacob was dressed casually, jeans and a dark button-up shirt that fit him just right, hinting at the broad shoulders beneath. His hair was a little messy, like he'd just run a hand through it, and his 5 o'clock shadow only added to his effortlessly put-together look. When he caught me looking, I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. His eyes met mine for just a moment, warm and amused, before he turned back to my mom. It was nothing, I told myself. A passing glance. But it had been enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through me. Dinner was the usual affair. Mom and Jacob reminiscing about old times while I mostly stayed quiet, chiming in only when necessary. It wasn't that I didn't want to participate. I just didn't trust myself to speak. Every time he laughed or leaned back in his chair, the movement casual but deliberate, I felt my pulse quicken. Then unexpectedly, Mom turned to me. "Why don't you join the conversation for once?" she said, a playful smile on her lips. "Jacob hasn't heard how busy you've been lately." I opened my mouth to protest, but Jacob cut in before I could. "She's always busy, huh?" he said, his eyes settling on me. "I've noticed. You've grown up so much, too fast, I think. You've got this quiet confidence about you now. It's impressive." The compliment hit me like a ton of bricks. I could feel the blush creeping up my neck, the warmth spreading to my cheeks as I fumbled for a response. "Thanks," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Jacob smiled, leaning forward slightly. "No, I mean it. You're sharp, thoughtful. It's not something you see every day." My mom laughed, waving him off. "Don't let her head get too big, Jacob." But his gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, and I felt the air between us shift. It wasn't anything overt, just the subtlest change in tone. The way his voice softened, as if his words were meant only for me. As the evening wore on, I couldn't help but watch him. He had this way of filling the space without overpowering it, his presence both commanding and inviting. He told stories that had mom in stitches, his hands gesturing animatedly as he spoke. Every so often, his eyes would flick to mine, and I'd feel a spark of something I couldn't quite name, something that both thrilled and terrified me. When dinner ended and it was time for him to leave, I followed Mom to the door. Jacob slipped on his jacket, his movements unhurried, as if he wasn't in a rush to go. "Thanks for dinner," he said, his voice warm as he pulled Mom into a quick hug. "Anytime," she replied, beaming. Then he turned to me. "And you," he said, his smile softening. "Don't stay a stranger. Hope to see you soon." The words were simple, but there was a weight to them that made my heart stutter. Then he winked, a quick, almost playful gesture that sent my thoughts into overdrive. I stood there, frozen, as he walked down the driveway, his figure disappearing into the night. My mom closed the door, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I lay awake that night, my mind racing. Every detail of the evening replayed in vivid clarity. The way he'd looked at me, the sound of his voice, the way he'd said my name. It was madness, I told myself. Utter madness. But no matter how much I tried to push it away, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. Jacob wasn't just my mom's friend anymore, and that realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. A couple of days later, out of nowhere, Jacob messaged me. The notification lit up my phone screen while I was sitting on my bed, scrolling aimlessly. I stared at his name for a moment, my heart racing. What could he possibly want? When I opened the message, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He wanted to have dinner with me, just us. My mind spun as I reread the words, trying to decode them. Was this casual? Friendly? Something else entirely? Part of me hesitated. What would my mom think if she knew? What did this mean for Jacob and me? But the idea thrilled me in a way I couldn't deny, and before I could overthink it, my fingers typed out a single word: yes. The day of the dinner, I stood in front of my closet for what felt like hours, trying on outfit after outfit. Nothing felt right. Too casual, too formal, too suggestive. I didn't even know what this was supposed to be, but I wanted to look good for him. Eventually, I settled on a simple yet flattering dress that hugged my figure without being too revealing. I hoped it struck the right balance between effortless and intentional. When I arrived at his place, I was struck by how much effort he put into the evening. The table was set with candles, their soft glow casting flickering shadows across the room. There was music playing, something smooth and melodic that I couldn't quite place, but added an air of intimacy. The smell of a delicious meal wafted through the air, and I couldn't help but feel like I'd walked into a scene from a romance movie. "Wow," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You like it?" he asked, his eyes scanning my face. "It's beautiful," I replied, feeling a mix of flattery and nerves. We sat down to eat, and I quickly realized this wasn't like any dinner we'd had before. Jacob was different, bolder, more direct. His compliments weren't the safe, casual kind he'd given in front of my mom. Tonight, they carried weight, each one landing like a gentle caress. "You look stunning tonight, Charlotte," he said at one point, his voice low and deliberate. My cheeks burned under his gaze. "Thank you," I murmured, my fingers fidgeting with the edge of my napkin. As the evening went on, I found myself relaxing, drawn in by his charm. His laughter was infectious, his stories captivating, and the way he looked at me made me feel like I was the only person in the world. At one point, he leaned in, his arm casually draping over the back of my chair. The proximity made my pulse quicken. When he finally let his hand slip to my waist, I felt a jolt of electricity course through me. My body tensed, not in discomfort, but in anticipation. I could feel the warmth of his touch through the fabric of my dress, and it was intoxicating. "Is this okay?" he asked softly, his voice laced with uncertainty. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. We sat like that for a while, the silence between us charged with something unspoken. His thumb traced small circles on my side, sending shivers up my spine. I couldn't bring myself to pull away, not that I wanted to. And then it happened. He leaned in closer, his eyes searching mine as if asking for permission. Before I could process what was happening, his lips met mine. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened. I froze for a moment, my mind screaming 1,000 different things at once. But then instinct took over, and I kissed him back. It was like a spark igniting a wildfire. Every nerve in my body felt alive, every touch sending waves of heat through me. His hands cradled my face, then slid down to my shoulders, pulling me closer. I could feel the strength in his grip, the urgency in the way he kissed me, and it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Time seemed to blur after that. One kiss led to another, each one more heated than the last. I barely registered him guiding me to his bedroom until I found myself there, standing in the soft glow of a bedside lamp. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice husky but gentle. I hesitated, not because I wasn't sure, but because the weight of what was happening hit me all at once. This was a line I could never uncross, a decision that would change everything. But when I looked into his eyes, all my doubts melted away. "Yes," I whispered. What followed was a whirlwind of sensations. His lips on mine, his hands exploring, the warmth of his body against me. It was both overwhelming and exhilarating, a mix of passion and vulnerability that left me breathless. At one point, I stepped away to text my mom, my hands trembling as I typed out a quick excuse about staying at a friend's place. It felt wrong to lie, but I couldn't bring myself to stop what was happening. He was sitting on the bed. I came over and climbed on top of him. It was very nice. He could help me with the pace, held me close to him, squeezed my thighs. The rest of the night passed in a haze of stolen kisses, whispered words, and moments that felt almost dreamlike. Lying beside him afterward, tangled in the sheets, I felt a strange mix of emotions, exhilaration, guilt, and something I couldn't quite name. As I drifted off to sleep in his arms, one thought kept circling in my mind. What happens now? The next morning, I walked through the front door trying my best to look composed, but inside I was a mess of emotions. My body felt heavy with exhaustion from the sleepless night, yet my heart was light, fluttering with a kind of exhilaration I'd never felt before. The memory of Jacob's touch, his voice, and the way he'd looked at me replayed in my mind like a song I couldn't stop humming. "Morning, honey," Mom called from the kitchen, her voice bright and cheery. She was pouring coffee, dressed in her usual robe, the picture of casual comfort. "You're home early. Everything okay?" I froze for a split second, the weight of her question crashing down on me. My mind raced for a plausible excuse, something that wouldn't raise suspicion. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, forcing a casual smile. "Just stayed at Emily's place. We were up late studying." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, but I could feel her eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than usual. Did I look different? Could she sense something was off? The thought sent a jolt of panic through me, but I kept my cool, acting like it was just another ordinary morning. Once I was safely upstairs in my room, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long, shaky breath. My heart was racing, not just from fear of being found out, but from the thrill of it all. What we were doing, what Jacob and I had done, felt forbidden, even wrong, but that only made it more intoxicating. That week, Jacob and I stayed in constant contact. His messages were short but sweet, laced with an undercurrent of flirtation that made my stomach flip every time my phone buzzed. "Did you get home okay? Thinking about you. Can't wait to see you again." Each text was a lifeline, a reminder that what we'd shared wasn't just a one-time thing. But as much as I wanted to see him again, our lives kept getting in the way. School consumed most of my time, and Jacob's work schedule was demanding. The distance was unbearable. I missed him so much it hurt, the ache of longing settling deep in my chest. Then one evening, Mom dropped a bombshell that sent my emotions into overdrive. "Jacob's coming over for dinner this weekend," she said casually, not even looking up from her laptop. My heart leaped and sank all at once. I was thrilled at the idea of seeing him again, but the thought of being under the same roof with him and my mom filled me with anxiety. How would he act? Would he give anything away? Would I? The days leading up to the dinner felt endless. I couldn't focus on anything. Classes blurred together, homework felt meaningless, and my thoughts were consumed by Jacob. When Saturday finally arrived, I spent hours getting ready, even though I told myself I was being ridiculous. I wore a dress that was just flattering enough to make me feel confident, but not so obvious that it would raise eyebrows. When Jacob arrived, I heard his voice before I saw him, that rich, warm tone that always made my stomach do flips. "Hey, Charlotte," he said as he stepped inside, his eyes finding mine almost immediately. "Hi," I managed, trying to sound casual, but my heart was hammering in my chest. Dinner was a strange mix of tension and familiarity. To anyone else, it would have looked like a normal evening, with Jacob and Mom catching up, laughing about old stories, and me chiming in here and there. But beneath the surface, it felt like a game of chess, every glance and word carefully measured. Jacob was his usual charming self, but there were moments when his eyes lingered on me just a little too long, or when his smile seemed to carry a hidden meaning. I caught myself stealing glances at him too, unable to help it. At one point, Mom left the table to grab something from the kitchen, leaving us alone for the first time all evening. The room felt charged, the air thick with unspoken words. "I've missed you," he said softly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. My cheeks flushed, and I looked down at my plate, trying to hide the smile tugging at my lips. "Me too," I whispered back. The sound of Mom returning snapped us both out of the moment, and we quickly fell back into the facade of polite conversation. But the tension between us didn't fade. It simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for another chance to break free. Seeing Jacob in our house, sitting at the dining table where so many ordinary nights had passed, was surreal. It should have felt normal. After all, he'd been here countless times before. But now everything was different. Every glance, every laugh, every seemingly innocent exchange carried a weight that no one else could feel. To Mom, it was just another evening catching up with an old friend. To me, it was a high-stakes game where one wrong move could expose everything. We talked and laughed as though nothing had changed, but beneath the surface, I was a mess of nerves and longing. Jacob's voice wrapped around me like a melody, familiar yet electrifying. His eyes would meet mine across the table, lingering for just a second too long, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Did Mom notice? Did she sense the tension? Or was I imagining it all? Then, as if fate decided to test us, Mom's phone rang. She excused herself with an apologetic smile, stepping into the other room to take the call. The air in the dining room shifted immediately. It was as if a thread holding us apart had snapped. Jacob's chair scraped softly against the floor as he leaned closer to me. My breath hitched, and before I could process what was happening, his lips were on mine. The kiss was quick but full of urgency, a collision of everything we couldn't say or do in the open. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the sound could fill the entire house. "Don't worry," he murmured, his voice low and reassuring. "She'll be gone for a while." His words were bold, reckless even, but I believed him. He asked me to show him the bathroom, his tone casual enough to mask the real reason. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly, and motioned for him to follow. The hallway felt impossibly long, each step a mix of exhilaration and dread. As soon as we reached the bathroom, he closed the door behind us and pulled me into his arms. The intensity of his gaze was almost too much, like he was drinking in every detail of my face, my expression. His hands cupped my face as he kissed me again, deeper this time. It was passionate, consuming, and utterly forbidden. I slowly knelt down. I couldn't think. I could barely breathe. The world outside that small, cramped bathroom seemed to fade away. All that mattered was him, the way he held me, the way his touch set my skin on fire. His hands traced the curve of my back, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, forgetting for a moment where we were or what we were risking. But then, like a bolt of lightning, we heard Mom's voice calling from the living room. It was distant, muffled by the walls, but it shattered the bubble we'd created around ourselves. Panic surged through me. My pulse was racing now for an entirely different reason. Jacob pulled back, his face composed in a way that made me envy his ability to stay calm. "We're fine," he whispered, smoothing my hair with a gentle hand. "Just take a deep breath." We hurried to fix ourselves, him straightening his shirt and me patting down my flushed cheeks and smoothing out my dress. Every second felt like an eternity, my ears straining for any sound that might suggest she was walking toward us. Finally, we stepped out of the bathroom together, our expressions carefully neutral. Mom was back at the dining table, her phone set aside. She looked up as we entered the room, her face warm and unsuspecting. "Everything okay?" she asked, her question as innocent as her tone. "Yeah," Jacob replied smoothly, his voice steady. "Charlotte just showed me where the bathroom was." I nodded, forcing a small smile, hoping it didn't look as strained as it felt. My heart was still racing, and I wondered if my cheeks were as red as they felt. Did she notice? Could she tell? Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, but if she suspected anything, she didn't let on. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I could barely focus on the conversation, my mind replaying the moments in the bathroom over and over. Every time Jacob spoke, his voice felt like a secret meant only for me. When he laughed, it sent a ripple through me, a reminder of the connection we were so carefully hiding. By the time Jacob finally said his goodbyes, I felt like I was holding my breath. He gave Mom a polite hug and turned to me with a warm, friendly smile that anyone would think was completely innocent. "Good night, Charlotte," he said, his voice soft but laced with meaning. "Good night," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. As the door closed behind him, I felt a rush of relief mixed with longing. The thrill of being so close to getting caught still coursed through me, making my hands tremble. Mom turned to me, her expression curious. "You okay, honey? You seem a little out of it tonight." I forced a laugh, waving her off. "Just tired," I said quickly. "It's been a long day." She nodded, accepting my answer without question, and I excused myself to my room. Once there, I collapsed onto my bed, burying my face in the pillow to stifle the scream of frustration and excitement that bubbled up inside me. My phone buzzed almost immediately, and I grabbed it, my heart skipping a beat when I saw Jacob's name. "You're amazing. Can't stop thinking about you." I smiled, the tension from the night melting away as I typed a reply. Me too. Lying there in the quiet of my room, the enormity of what we were doing began to sink in. It was dangerous, complicated, and so wrong. But as much as I tried to convince myself to walk away, I knew I couldn't. I was in too deep, and there was no turning back now. When Jacob left that night, I let out a long, shaky breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. I thought that was it until the next dinner, the next stolen moment. But then just 5 minutes later, a soft, deliberate knock came at my window. At first, I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I must have imagined it, until it came again. Cautiously, I pulled back the curtain, and there he was, standing in the moonlight like something out of a dream. "Jacob," I whispered, my voice barely audible, equal parts surprise and disbelief. He smiled, that signature grin of his that always made me weak, and gestured for me to open the window. My logical mind screamed at me to stop, to think about what I was doing, but my heart had already decided. I unlatched the window and slid it open. Before I could even ask why he was there, he climbed in effortlessly, his movements quick and confident. "I couldn't leave," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not yet." And then he scooped me up into his arms. It felt surreal, like time had stopped, and the only thing that existed was him. He carried me to my bed, laying me down gently, his eyes never leaving mine. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. His touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine. I knew how reckless this was, how dangerous, but in that moment, I didn't care. Every ounce of fear, every whisper of doubt was drowned out by the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel. We spent the night together, wrapped in each other's arms. There was a quiet intensity between us, a connection so profound it felt almost otherworldly. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word felt like a secret only we knew, a world we created just for ourselves. The hours melted away, and for the first time in forever, I felt completely alive. But morning came far too quickly. The soft gray light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, and with it came the harsh reality of our situation. Jacob lay beside me, his arm draped over my waist, his breathing steady and calm. I watched him for a moment, torn between the overwhelming happiness of being with him and the cold dread of what could happen if we were caught. And then came the knock. It was light but firm, and it sent a jolt of terror straight through me. My bedroom door. My mom's voice followed, muffled but unmistakable. "Charlotte, are you awake?" Panic surged through me like a tidal wave. Jacob's eyes flew open, and we both froze, staring at each other in silent horror. My mind raced. What do I do? What do I say? I'm awake, Mom, I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Just getting up now." "Okay, sweetheart," she replied, her tone casual and unsuspecting. "Come down for breakfast when you're ready." I held my breath, waiting to see if she'd come in. The silence that followed was deafening, but after a moment, her footsteps retreated down the hall. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. We weren't out of the woods yet. Jacob moved quickly, slipping out of bed and pulling on his clothes with practiced ease. "I'll go out the way I came in," he whispered, his voice steady despite the situation. I nodded, still too shaken to speak. He kissed me once, quick but full of meaning, before climbing back out through the window. I watched him disappear into the early morning light, my heart pounding in my chest. As I closed the window behind him, I leaned against the frame, trying to catch my breath. The thrill of the night still lingered, but so did the fear. It was insane, really, this thing between us. It was secret, forbidden and completely out of control. Yet, I couldn't stop myself. The rest of the morning was a blur. I went through the motions, sitting at the breakfast table with Mom, nodding along to her conversation, all the while replaying every detail of the night before. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I snuck a glance at it under the table. Made it home. Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was perfect. I felt a rush of warmth and excitement, my lips curving into a small smile. I quickly typed back, "Me too. I already miss you." The day went on, but I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped, hoping it was him. This wasn't just a crush anymore. It was something much bigger, much more consuming. It was dangerous and complicated, but it was also exhilarating and irresistible. I knew I was walking a fine line, that one wrong move could unravel everything. But as much as I tried to reason with myself, to think about the consequences, I couldn't bring myself to end it. Jacob was like a fire, both comforting and destructive, and I was willingly stepping into the flames. For better or worse, I was his, and I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. That's all. That's my story, one full of twists, excitement, and moments that will forever be a part of me. Thank you for taking the time to listen, for being a part of this journey with me. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe even found a little bit of yourself in it. Thank you for watching.